A draft bust can often be described as a player that is drafted that never truly meets the expectations of the team that drafted them, based on their talent, skills, and production at the collegiate level. With that said, few players start out their career looking like that, then 2 years later end up becoming one of the best players at their position, only to make a 360-degree turn from the beginning of their career and end up being right back to where they started. This analogy is one of the best ones to describe that of Nelson Agholor, a wide receiver who attended USC from 2012 to 2014. He had been an All-American high school player and a first and second team All-Pac-12 player in 2014 and 2013 respectively. In that 2014 season, Nelson Agholor had amassed over 1,300 receiving yards from 100 receptions and had 12 touchdowns. So Nelson Agholor was seen in the NFL as a guy who could end up being a pretty dependable player. He could play on the outside, on the inside. He could run any route on the route tree. He could return kicks and punts, and he could play jet sweep running back. At the end of his junior season at USC, Nelson Agholor decided to forgo his senior season to enter the draft, to which he was expected to be a first to second round draft pick with the qualifications that were previously outlined. However, scouts had seen three major flaws in Nelson Agholor's game. While being quick, he wasn't overly fast, he wasn't overly big either, and he dropped too many passes. With that in mind, first-year GM and third-year head coach Chip Kelly decided to draft Nelson Agholor with the 20th overall pick in the 2015 NFL Draft, after parting ways with Jeremy Maclin during the offseason. Speaking of Jeremy Maclin, Nelson Agholor did strike many to compare him to the former Missouri wide receiver as well as Randall Cobb of the Green Bay Packers at the time. Many were unsure of what they would get from the young receiver until the team's first preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts.
Now Sanchez goes up top. Agholor, great catch, look at him go! Into the end zone.
One of the more impressive plays of the day, went up, snagged it with his hands.
That screen catch for a touchdown by Agholor was all the eye test the NFL needed to declare him an instant stud, and despite Nelson Agholor having an underwhelming rest of the preseason, he had high expectations by the fans. It would be an understatement if I were to say that Nelson Agholor did not meet those expectations for the fans. He had 23 receptions, 283 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown against the Buffalo Bills late in the season, and dropped a total of 6 out of his 44 targets. Now that's bad. However, Miles Austin, Riley Cooper, Zach Ertz, Jordan Matthews, Ryan Matthews, Darren Sproles, DeMarco Murray, and Kenyon Barner dropped a total of 62 total passes in 2015. So Nelson Agholor was in terrible company. Despite getting a new head coach in the 2016 campaign, for Nelson Agholor it wouldn't be much better. After being accused and having the case dropped of sexually assaulting a female dancer at a strip club, Nelson Agholor would continue the stigma of dropping passes, this time dropping almost 10 passes with a higher position with the team, starting opposite of Jordan Matthews. Nelson Agholor did catch more touchdowns than he did in 2015, but late in the season, an illegal formation penalty against Seattle that would negate a touchdown would see the young receiver getting benched for his mental miscues. Eagles fans wanted Nelson Agholor to just go away. Obviously, he couldn't be a starting wide receiver in the NFL. Sure, he had the skills, sure, he had the talent, but all of those things are meaningless if you cannot put the product on the field. Remember when I said Nelson Agholor would be one of the best players at his position in 2017 and 2018? Well, I wasn't kidding, because in those years, Nelson Agholor became a fine slot receiver, catching an average of 63 passes and having 740 yards over 2 seasons with 12 touchdowns between both seasons. Nelson Agholor had effectively re-established his NFL image behind newly acquired Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith. We couldn't believe that Nelson Agholor could do this.
Darren Sproles in the backfield, 3rd down and 12. Wentz can't find anyone, spins away, under pressure, still on his feet. Now he fires downfield and it's caught by Nelson Agholor for an Eagles touchdown. 58 yards.
And not only this, but he continued doing this over the span of 2 seasons, limiting his drops and being the player to help Carson Wentz and Nick Foles get themselves out of sticky situations. He became the guy who dropped everything under the sun and made mental mistakes to a guy who could be depended on. He even won his very first Super Bowl as a part of the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles, which was a great honor. In order to put more cap space into the 2018 season, Howie Roseman decided to restructure the contract of Nelson Agholor, making his 2019 contract be $9 million, which was good for the 2018 season. However, it wasn't good for the team in the 2019 season. So in essence, the Eagles were owing a 5th-year slot receiver almost as much as a mid-tier starting receiver. This made it pretty difficult to trade Nelson Agholor because nobody would want to trade a draft pick for a slot receiver that was taking up that much cap space. Still, things were looking up for Nelson Agholor. He was playing behind Alshon Jeffrey and reacquired Deshaun Jackson. What could go wrong? You see, here's where the 360-degree turn took place in his career. After 2 great seasons for the guy, he saw both Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey get injured by week 2. And while Alshon Jeffrey played sparingly throughout the season, Deshaun Jackson would be effectively sidelined for the whole year, which is an explanation for a completely different video. Nelson Agholor had a few decent opportunities, but like in 2015 and 16, they dropped like the ball at Times Square during New Year's Eve. He did have 3 touchdowns, but his production dropped off as Nelson Agholor was pretty much becoming a meme in Philadelphia after dropping this game-winning touchdown pass. Apparently after a Week 2 Sunday Night Football loss to the 0-1 Falcons, there was a fire in Philadelphia where a firefighter caught a child out of the window of a burning building. He was interviewed and struck such a chord with Eagles fans that he became an overnight meme. One thing I can compliment Nelson Agholor about is the fact that he was a classy guy and invited the man to the next Philadelphia Eagles home game. However, Nelson Agholor's 2019 campaign was derailed from a nagging knee injury that kept him out of the second half of the football season. Now, what's my opinion about Nelson Agholor? He reminds me of when I play golf. When I expect to not do anything, I play well, but when I get too confident, I play very poorly. I believe some of that has to do with why Nelson Agholor played so poorly with the Eagles. The guy had all the skills and talent in the world, but one thing he didn't have was a short memory. I really do think that he got into his own head, and because he overthought things, he made mental mistakes that let his teammates down. It really does show that these players have a lot of humanity and just don't play like football robots. They have feelings, they have emotions. I think that what Nelson Agholor was able to accomplish with the Eagles is better than most guys are able to. Do I think he will ever be able to play as a starter for another team? In my right mind, no. I think that Nelson needs to take some time to get his body and his mind right. Because if I know anything about sports, it has just as much mental qualifications as it does physical. What I also know is that anything goes.
But this is a cover 0 by Belichick every time. Everybody comes. Here they come. Off his back foot. He heaves it. Toward the end zone and off the fingertips of Agholor. He had a chance to make a play on it.
And put some people down. My man just throwing babies out the window. We was catching him. I'm like Agholor.
And this place would have erupted if this one goes.
And his mishaps, I like to put that out there.